Rishi Sunak had to be dragged, kicking and screaming to make that decision.
We had Partygate, we had Liz Truss, and now we've got Gamblegate. Do you feel let down by your own party?
Well, I do feel let down by some of my own party, but the first thing you've got to do, if you're serious about tackling a problem, is to acknowledge it.
Keir Starmer did say that Wales was the blueprint for UK Labour in government, and he refuses to say it anymore. Why are you so scared of that word?
I am absolutely proud of Labour's record on devolution in Wales.
So is Wales still the blueprint for a UK Labour government?
Of course.
Hello and welcome to a special episode of the Political Fourcast, the Wales edition. Croeso. We're into the final week of the election. Can Rishi Sunak do anything to avoid what many polls suggest could be the worst ever result for the Conservative Party? The headlines have been dominated by betting scandals, the rise of reform, and the Prime Minister's D-Day blunder. In the last stretch, will attention now finally turn to what Keir Starmer will do if he wins? Well, is there an answer to that particular question right here in Wales, where the Labour Party have been in power, basically forever? Keir Starmer even once said Wales is a blueprint for a Labour government, although he doesn't seem to want to repeat that comment much of late. Well, to talk about all this and more, we're joined by an all-star panel. Welsh Secretary David T.C. Davies, Shadow Cabinet Minister Nick Thomas-Symmonds, and Plaid Cymru leader Rhun ap Iorwerth. David T.C. Davies, first of all to you. We're in the final stretch now. Some people already have their postal ballots. Is there anything that Rishi Sunak can do to turn things around?
Well, certainly there is. I don't accept what the opinion polls say anyway, and my own opinion poll is based on going out and talking to people on the doorsteps. And I accept there are people who are unhappy with things that have gone on over the last few years and even over the last few weeks. But I think what most people are going to focus on is who's going to deliver best for the economy, who's going to deliver public services.
But what is the plan? I mean, you're down to the wire now. Has Rishi Sunak got a plan?
Absolutely. I mean, the plan is to keep going, to ask the questions. First of all, what is it that Labour are going to do differently? I've been to numerous hustings, and what I hear Labour candidates say is, well, they've been in power for 14 years, we need a change. That seems to be the extent of the argument.
But I wonder, do you feel that Rishi Sunak has found a bit of a weakness in Keir Starmer right at the end of this campaign on immigration? Because he keeps asking, doesn't he, what would you do with people who arrive here through irregular means? And he said to Keir Starmer, would you do a returns deal with the Ayatollah and the Taliban?
Well, no, and the point on that, no, he hasn't found a weakness, by the way. And I mean, the Prime Minister's performance during this general election campaign has been lamentable, frankly, from the standing in the pouring rain to start with to then, I won't go back over the D-Day fiasco, but it was frankly disrespectful that the Prime Minister at any moment, let alone a general election, should have scooted off away early and not paid his respects as he should have done. But with regard to the point that you're making, the problem for the Conservatives, quite frankly, is they haven't got the returns agreements that they want to, and they've never got a successor returns agreement to the Dublin III agreement that we had when we were members of the European Union. So they can't actually return anybody to the European continent. And the reason that has happened is because in the years since we left the European Union, the Conservatives have failed to get that returns agreement. And that was the point that Keir Starmer has made, not just in this campaign, but for many, many months. It's a chronic Conservative failure.
I mean, gosh, we've heard so many of these arguments in the past few weeks. What is actually cutting through? I don't expect you to give me a totally honest answer at this stage in the campaign, but really, what are people bringing up? Are they bringing up the gambling story?
I was going to say, I'm not a betting man. I'll leave that to the Conservatives, but I think we can be fairly sure what's going to happen at the end of this, and Keir Starmer will be the Prime Minister. And that frames the election in a really interesting way in Wales. I think, yes, we do want a change, and there will be a change of UK government. But the question we're able to ask in Plaid Cymru is, what kind of change do you want that to represent? And the lack of meaningful change, other than not being the Tories, means people are questioning what that Labour government will actually look like. What will it deliver that's different?
Let's just talk about the betting scandal, because that is something that a lot of people are talking about. And it's, you know, a lot of it comes from here in Wales, doesn't it? The two of the candidates, the Welsh Conservative candidates, one is an MP and one is a member of the Senedd, have been suspended now. There's one member of the Labour Party, a Labour candidate, has also been suspended. Do you think this reflects pretty poorly on all politicians?
Well, actually, I do think there is a question of leadership in this, because you mentioned the one Labour candidate, cross obviously in England rather than in Wales. But that comes to light, and that candidate's support is withdrawn, membership suspended, immediately that day. How long did Rishi Sunak dither and delay over the Welsh Conservative candidate who has ended up having support withdrawn this week? We've never had any credible explanation from Rishi Sunak as to why it took him so long to take any form of decisive action. And I think that's the real question at Rishi Sunak's door.
Do you know the answer?
Why
Davies?
didn't he act sooner?
So I think there is a problem with this. I have a real problem with it. I've seen issues with standards of behaviour generally, and it cuts across all political parties. And it's not just over betting. We've seen 2 other Labour members being suspended for what could be serious things, but they haven't been found guilty of anything. So let's not try to, I don't want to turn this into political football, but to say anyone who's involved in politics needs to display high standards. Can I say, when I came into the Wales office, I knew that there was a perception amongst the public, not unjustified, that there'd been too much, that people had been drinking alcohol through the COVID pandemic. The rights and wrongs that I won't go into, but the first thing I did was to set out in writing that I wanted no alcohol stored in the Wales office, consumed in the Wales office, or drunk at any official meetings or events that I attended in my capacity as a Welsh Office Minister. And I said that I would be the first to live by that example. That is setting an example of standard.
Yeah.
And
of course,
Rishi's
what happens with MPs or Senedd members? What happens with MPs, for example, is that somebody would be suspended whilst an investigation is ongoing, you know, without prejudice, but to step away. And in an election, that would mean a candidate having to step away. And Rishi Sunak had to be dragged, you know, kicking and screaming to make that decision, because he knew this had got to such a point where it had been amplified out of all proportion. Then he had to try to keep it quiet. It's too late then in terms of showing judgment.
David, can I just ask you, I mean, you're having to defend the Conservative record in this election. As a member of the Cabinet, we had Partygate, we had Liz Truss, and now we've got Gamblegate. And you tell us you're a man of standards, but do you feel let down by your own party?
Well, I do feel let down by some of my own party, but the first thing you've got to do, if you're serious about tackling a problem, is to acknowledge it. And that's why I acknowledge that alcohol and gambling have been a problem. If we're going to turn this into a political football, you're only talking to me. We're in Wales. We have a First Minister who's taken £200,000 from somebody convicted of waste offences, from a company that received £400,000 in a loan from a bank that was backed by the Welsh Government. And the First Minister has lost a vote of confidence and yet is still in his place. Now, you know, we can all point the finger. I am telling you now, I don't think the gambling stuff
no rules were broken.
Absolutely. No, well, as far as we know, no rules have been broken with the gambling until the Gambling Commission say otherwise. But obviously, it doesn't look like good behaviour to me, and it's right that we acknowledge that. The same with the First Minister.
Sounds like, Nick, you want to put up a defence for the First Minister.
There's no investigation into wrongdoing by Vaughan Gething. There's no investigation. It was within the rules. And on the concern about the rules, to Rhun's point, it's quite right that former First Minister Carwyn Jones, very widely respected across parties, is looking at the rules. But there's no suggestion that any rules were broken.
Hang on, everyone. Before we go on, just for the benefit of the audience, what we're talking about when we're talking about the First Minister of Wales and Vaughan Gething is this £200,000 donation that he received during the Labour leadership race.
Unprecedented in Wales.
Well, which was from a company that had run by somebody who had a criminal conviction for environmental dumping, basically. And everyone's agreed there was no rules broken, but he then lost a vote of confidence, didn't he? I mean, while we're all sat here...
Hang on. Just on the vote of confidence, just for a minute, it's not like a binding vote of confidence, and it's one in which David's colleagues in the Senedd, for their own reasons, decided not to honour the peering system. So you had two Labour members.
I'm not sure.
And Rhun,
as I said
you
before,
very quickly joined hands with the Conservatives in that endeavour.
Go on and answer that,
the
Rhun.
Liberal Democrat member, Conservatives and Plaid Cymru were reflecting what was clearly the view of the people of Wales, that we had a First Minister who had lost confidence. And I said before that, and I still maintain now, this was Labour's call, and it was Labour members who failed to give Vaughan getting his backing.
Off ill.
It was Labour. We have remote voting in our Senate. There are means that we have proxy voting in the Welsh Parliament. They made a decision not to back that First Minister. And Nick knows full well, I know he wants to deflect away from this, but knows full well that there are Labour members in the Welsh Parliament, and no doubt at Westminster too, who are appalled at the lack of judgment and the lack of ability of Vaughan Gething to put his hand up and say, I got this one badly wrong.
Well, let's ask Nick before we move on. Are you appalled at the Welsh First Minister's lack of judgment?
Absolutely not, and I've got 100% confidence in the Welsh First Minister. And indeed, I mean, Rhun and David's parties joined together very closely indeed.
Is that in the same way as Labour joined?
Is
that in the same way as Labour joined with the Conservatives in a no confidence vote in Scotland?
In Parliament, the peering system would have been honoured. They made a choice not to honour the
Nick, I've got to call you out here. They weren't ill. That's the reality is they were both very critical of Vaughan's behaviour.
I'm sorry.
And that's why they didn't turn up.
Nobody
in Wales believes that they were too ill to log on.
We might need some more. Guys.
I've got to answer that.
Before you do, the context is here, so people can follow what you're actually arguing about.
Members have genuinely spoken, rather movingly, about mental health issues, for example, they've had and others. To then go to say they're not really ill, I think is really the wrong thing to do.
The vote that the Welsh First Minister lost, the vote of confidence. He lost that vote, and two Welsh Labour members of the Senate were not present to vote because they said they were unwell.
Because they were, who had been very critical of him. The two Labour members who'd been very critical of him were too ill to turn up or to log onto their computer and vote remotely.
And I think Nick has taken issue with that. But
right. Well, I think we can all make our own judgments on that.
Right. We keep hearing this is a change election. But what does change actually mean here in Wales? Because we've had a Labour government for 25 years running key public services.
Change would mean Labour governments at both ends of the M4. And we talk about public services. If you look at when NHS levels were at their highest level of satisfaction across the UK, it was the early part of 2010. And that was because you'd had, for over a decade then, Labour governments on either side of the M4. And I think we need economic stability, which I'm afraid the Conservatives in recent years simply haven't delivered, and people out there are still paying the price in their mortgages, paying the price in inflation, cost of food. I think we need to have energy security, which is really, really important. That was where I think the Conservatives left us exposed in 2022 when Putin illegally invaded Ukraine. We didn't have that.
Nick, those fundamental public services that matter so much to people, schools, hospitals. Labour's been running them, hasn't it, for 25 years, and people see that the schools are bottom of the international league tables and the NHS waiting lists are through the roof, and that's Labour. What's going to change?
You can pick what's going to change is what happens when you get Labour governments. They leave the NHS across the UK in a better position always than where they found it. And to take the NHS, you can pick for example, mental health, where we have mental health hotline here in Wales, and we're leading the way as compared to England. You talk about education on you look at the PISA indicators that were coming up for Wales before the pandemic. You look at you use schools very broadly then, but if you look, for example, at our primary sector where it has great strengths, and I would say too, my children go to local schools, primary schools, one primary school and indeed a secondary school in Wales. Our teachers in Wales do a fantastic job, and I think it's unfair to make some of the criticism that happens, but the fundamental thing is this. Look at, as I say, when the NHS across the UK had its highest satisfaction levels. But here in Wales, it was when we had Labour in Wales, Labour in the UK.
We had the most bizarre sight, didn't we, early in this campaign, of the Labour Health Minister for Wales holding up a placard at a Labour event calling for the modernisation of the NHS that she herself runs, I can see why you would want to distance yourself from Welsh government, really, but Welsh government can't distance itself from Welsh government. Labour has run the NHS in Wales. Couple that with conservative austerity for 14 years, and we have the trouble that we have now. We need a new change. If I could pick up on something that
hang on, Rhun, before you pick up, just keep this thread going, okay? Because we are talking about public services, health and education. I'm sure David wants to respond to Nick.
The first thing is, and the Senedd's own documents, which are online, will demonstrate, £1.20 per head is being given to the Welsh Labour government for each pound that's been spent in England. So there's absolutely no excuse for the fact that we have the longest waiting list in the UK. We have over 20,000 people have waited more than 2 years for treatment in Wales. The comparable figure in England is a couple of hundred. That's England with 20 times the population. We've had a situation where the Welsh Labour government took full charge of COVID and then refused to have a public inquiry into it. And we also know that had they done so, it's unlikely it would have thrown much light on anything, because the then Health Minister, now First Minister, was ordering other ministers to delete WhatsApp messages that related to decisions that were taking place.
David, if it's as bad as you say it is in Wales, why do Welsh people keep voting Labour, and why are Welsh Labour so high in the opinion polls right now in Wales? If they were as bothered as you seem to suggest they are, then they should.
Rhun has pointed out that Labour are trying to distance themselves from their own policies. They're trying to pretend that they don't run the NHS in Wales, and a lot of people believe this. They are fully responsible for every decision that's taken about the management of the NHS in Wales.
Don't you think, David, that people in Wales know who runs the NHS?
The percentage of people who actually think it's got something to do with the UK government is still very high. I've seen figures suggesting around 50%.
It has something to do with the UK government. It's unsurprising they think that.
Well,
of course it does.
But it doesn't.
Of course it does. The spending envelope that comes to Wales.
Nick, the envelope that gives 20% more. But when you say modernise the NHS, when a health minister gets up and says modernise the NHS, she alone can modernise the NHS because she's running the NHS.
Hang on. Just 2 points here. In terms of modernisation, of course, the advancement of personalised medicine, the use of technology, including artificial intelligence, how we look at scans, there is going to be a huge modernisation of the NHS in technology, and that the Welsh Health Minister would be forward-looking in favour of that is, I would suggest, unsurprising. But hang on, David talks about responsibility. The disastrous 49-day premiership of Liz Truss, what it did to our international reputation, what it did to our public finances. Responsibility for that lies in one place. It lies with the Conservative Party at Westminster that put her in that office.
But what about the continuation of those spending levels? We had the Wales Governance Centre at Cardiff University saying only this week that Labour coming into power are bound to make the same cuts that the Conservatives are bound to.
But let's address the elephant in the room. People vote Labour in Wales, and they're telling pollsters they're going to vote Labour in Wales in extraordinarily high numbers. They're not turning to you according to the opinion polls. You're not the change that the people seem to say they want.
There is absolutely a need to get rid of the Conservative government at Westminster. We say in this election that Keir Starmer will become Prime Minister regardless of what Wales votes, and that's really, really important. And we need to make sure that we maximise that idea in people's heads that a vote for Plaid Cymru can make a real difference in terms of sending a message to Labour. Now, of course, it's very difficult in a first-past-the-post system that very few countries have now to change who wins in most seats. But sending that message is a core part of this election for us. And people are telling us on the doorstep, picking up on what David Davies said, in 1997, okay?
Let's keep the thread if we can.
I was working as a journalist then, and whether you liked him or not, there was a real feeling that Tony Blair was coming in with something new and exciting and a new vision, and there is nothing of the sort in this election.
So, Rhun has just said to vote Plaid Cymru to send a message. If you vote Welsh Labour, you can send a government to Westminster, and that's the difference.
But have another Labour MP to put their arms around Keir Starmer and say what a good job he's doing every day. We need to hold him to account, and that's
I'm quite interested in this idea that there wasn't the groundswell of enthusiasm for Keir Starmer, and there was for Tony Blair. Is that true? Were people saying the similar sort of thing when in 1997?
The Conservatives in 1996, early 1997, were making exactly the same argument. They were saying there was no enthusiasm for Labour. It's just what they do when they are facing Labour in a general election in this way. The idea that anybody was saying any different in 1996-97 is to totally misremember it.
Can you let us in on something, Nick, on internal Welsh Labour thinking. I'm going to have a pop now because just a little go. Because Keir Starmer did say that Wales was the blueprint for UK Labour in government, and he refuses to say it anymore. Why are you so scared of that word?
I'm not scared of it. Let me give you an example. I used to be the Shadow Secretary of State for International Trade. And when I went around the world to different places, you took up a blueprint. People used to often ask me in other countries about the Welsh Government's Wellbeing and Future Generations Act, which they, not me saying it was a blueprint, but they used to say was a blueprint. So I am absolutely proud of Labour's record on devolution in Wales and the way in which Welsh Labour on so many issues has led the way.
So is Wales still the blueprint for a UK Labour government?
Of course, and we are a progressive nation here in Wales. But what I am saying is,
Wales has been
no. Wales, I'll tell you exactly where the blueprint is. The blueprint is Labour in Wales and Labour in Westminster. Because if you look at where Wales was led after over a decade of both of them in 2010. That's the blueprint. Public services in Wales. When you've got Welsh Labour in Cardiff. You've got UK Labour in power in Westminster. That is the blueprint that gives people across Wales the public services they need. Of course, it's not a blueprint when you've got the Conservatives at Westminster completely undermining devolution.
We've already discussed failing public services, lower standards. Where's the money gone? We can see that going on schemes like extra politicians, £120 million. 20-mile-an-hour road signs, this blanket 20-mile-an-hour speed limit in all areas, which we're 30 miles an hour, has cost a lot of money. We see it in the decision not to build any more new roads in Wales. No major new road building projects because of the climate emergency, which is a disaster as far as getting inward investment into Wales is concerned. And finally, on agriculture, the ludicrous plan to tell farmers to dig up 10% of their land and plant trees and then have another 10% for rewilding, to take 20% of productive agricultural land out of circulation in order to sort of deal with one of Welsh Labour's pet projects. That's the blueprint for the rest of the United Kingdom. Longer waiting lists, lower educational standards, 20-mile-an-hour speed limits, more politicians, and less land being used to graze agriculture or grow crops. You
did utter the words 20 miles per hour zones, which they have sort of traction, don't they? Nick, is 20 mile per hour zones, is that part of the blueprint for UK government? That's been done in Wales.
With the 20 miles an hour speed limits, and it isn't blanket, we absolutely have to take a pragmatic approach. Now, in built-up areas, in areas where you have schools and hospitals, I'm absolutely in favour of 20 miles an hour. What we have to get right, and this is why I think the Welsh Government is taking absolutely the right approach on this, is where you have main roads, local authorities have a discretion. I think it's absolutely right that they do. What they have to do is make sure now, as they review it, that we do have the 20 miles an hour we need. And by the way, the statistics show that the casualties are going down. Yeah. The statistics show that we do have fewer people now being injured on our roads. And it's frankly common sense. If you have a person who's hit at 20 rather than 30, they've got a much better chance of surviving. But what I think the Welsh Government's approach of pragmatism now is so important.
So you could say
Labour government made a complete mess of implementing it. I support the principle, okay? Last September, soon after it was brought in, we called for that review, saying there are so many places where it's unreasonable. Government failed to get that consistency of the application of the legislation, for example. It took until April this year for that review to get underway. It should have been done straight away because you need support for it where it's reasonable. Otherwise, you lose support for the principle. And in terms of safety, it's a good policy, but goodness me, it was badly done.
And Andrew R.T. Davies used to support it, David, didn't he? He's got the wonderful poster saying
outside schools, hospitals, everyone supports it. I've campaigned for it.
And housing estates.
Or anywhere.
So it's a long list.
But a blanket speed limit on all 30 mile an hour zones.
It's not blanket.
It covers 96% of all 30 mile an hour roads.
But they can all be exempted.
96% is pretty much a blanket as far as I can see. We're covering 96% of a bed with a blanket. It's a blanket on the bed.
Well, this is a forecast, so briefly, everyone please, let's just look ahead to what might happen in the election. Your forecast, your prediction, David.
Well, I don't want to make predictions, but what I will say is that I think people, when they go into that voting booth, are going to be thinking about Who is going to be best placed to keep inflation down to the low level it is, to keep down unemployment, to ensure that growth continues, to be the joint fastest in the G7, to make sure that we get huge inward investment projects? Who is going to be best placed to deliver public services? We can already see the difference between the NHS in England cutting waiting lists and the NHS in Wales where they're getting longer. And I think people are going to say only the Conservative Party have a plan to deliver on that.
You can tell it's days until the election, can't you? The briefest of answers now have to pack everything in. But I mean, just very, very briefly, do you think the result will be tighter, at least, than the polls suggest? Because if we go by the polls now, it's going to be a wipeout.
I'll make only one prediction. The polls are not correct.
So it's going to be tighter.
I'll come back and I'll defend that statement afterwards. I don't think we've got the full story from the opinion polls.
Okay. Rhun, your prediction, your election prediction.
The Conservatives will lose heavily. That's a good thing after the 14 years of hurts that we have had, and Plaid Cymru will be doing our best to make sure that happens. Labour will get the reins of power. Keir Starmer will become the Prime Minister, but I think there's a real attraction, as we saw actually in the local election and the Police and Crime Commissioner election recently, where it's clear that somebody can hold Labour to account, beat both Labour and the Conservatives. People want that. People are interested in who can do that, and that's what Plaid Cymru represents in this election in Wales, of course.
Nick, are the polls correct?
The polls are a snapshot. Next week is an opportunity for change in our country, but that change will only happen if people go out and vote for it. And I just ask people to ask themselves one question. After 14 years of the Conservatives in office, do you feel better off or not? And the overwhelming answer I get on the doorstep is people do not feel better off. So if you want to end the chaos, if you want to end the trashing of standards in public life that's happened under this government, end the incompetence, the 5 prime ministers of recent years, the 7 chancellors of the Exchequer, the 9 education secretaries, and actually vote for change, for a party with a plan for growth that can then invest in our public services and put them back where they should be, then vote Labour next week.
Thank you very much. Can I just ask, when all this is out of the way next week and some of the heat has come back out of it, will you be glad? Will you talk to each other like a little bit more normally?
Talk to each other now.
We can be very civil with each other. I've seen a lot of both of them actually over the past few weeks.
You can. I always think it's really important in politics. You can have very, very robust discussions from very, very different perspectives, but it doesn't mean you have to attack each other personally.
And I think that's right. And I do pay tribute to Nick and Rhun, who I've known a long time, and I know to be politicians who have very high standards. And I'm, I don't have any personal animosity towards any of them.
I was learning earlier that Rhun even helped you with some of your exams.
He did.
Yes.
He did. With Welsh, I've got a Welsh GCSE, I think, thanks to you.
We did when I was a journalist.
Yeah.
It would have been me interviewing you, I guess, as part of a Welsh language oral exam, which I was very pleased to do, and I praised him for his...
I got an A. It was the only A I've ever had in an exam. So
there you go then.
Well done.
Thank you very much, all of you, for your time. Well, that is this week's Political Forecast. Goodbye. Hwyl fawr.